Ma'am, we have quite a few questions,
Yep.
and I would like to take.
Shweta, you're not audible. You're not
Uh,
connect.
I
Okay.
am
I can
Yes,
hear.
yes, yes. We can hear you. We can hear you.
okay. So there are a couple of questions, but I would like to start with one particular question. It is regarding taxonomy, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we have a question, okay, from Suraj Bhosle. Okay, he is asking you at what point we decide to name specimen as new ichnogenus. Okay, because
Okay.
most of the times scientific community, they question you when you
Yeah, right.
propose it. Okay,
Hmm. Hmm.
so because there is this thing, one organism can create different behavior. So
Yeah,
at what point you should decide that this is your new ichnospecies or this is your new taxa? So that is what is his question.
yeah. That's a very fundamental and very nice question, because there are people who have the tendency to name each turn and every change of millimeters in size as something new. Here now, ichnotaxonomy has advanced a lot, and what you need to basically understand is that finally we are dealing with morphology, and the morphological features should be very, very diagnostic, different from what you already have, and dimensions do not, what do you say, give you a very good stand, but yes, it can tell you certain things about, if you understand biology well, then you could have species based on the dimensions, mainly because there are animals that only grow up to a certain size, and if they don't grow beyond a certain size, they cannot be creating traces beyond a certain width. And for this, he should refer to a paper by Bertling et al., published in Lithia in 2004. It gives you a lot of insights into how ichnospecies and ichnogenera should be named. And there are certain seminal papers by Nost on bivalve traces and on a rhizocorallium. And yes, I mean, I know Suraj, so I can share with him these publications.
Ma'am, I would like to add one more thing over here. He is
Yeah,
asking
please.
you
Yeah.
if there is one organism which is producing different behaviors.
Mm.
We had this concept of compound traces, right?
Right.
So when you know that one organism is capable, for example, bivalve,
Yeah.
okay, if he is capable of creating so many traces, we know that there is a concept called as compound traces.
Right.
So when you know this, then you can, like, you will decide at this time I should stop, I should not go with this new ichnogenus, new ichnospecies kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, this was one. Then you talked about calcitic and aragonetic sea, right?
Right.
Calcitic and aragonated dissolution. So we have a question here.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, this is from Ramanand Yadav. Okay,
Hmm.
he's asking, can we construct that much of past
Hmm.
uh, carbonate ion in the pore water in terms of calcitic or aragonetic dissolution? Can we
Hmm.
really do that? That is what his question is like.
Right. Yes, I would definitely like to answer this, and that is because you have to know that what many times we get these casts of gastropods or bivalves, and along with them we have the casts, natural casts of the borings also. So if you know the taxonomy of the gastropods or the taxonomy of the bivalves, then you know of what kind of calcium carbonate they're made up of, whether they're made up of calcium calcite or whether they're made up of aragonite. So if those particular group of shells are made up of aragonite and they are occurring as molds, that definitely means that there has been a change in pore water chemistry, because these pore waters that dissolve away the original shell, and vice versa.
So
It rarely
here,
happens that there are certain types of foraminifera and oysters that are affected by this feature. By the way, foraminifera are also predated upon, and you have microborings.
So he
Did I
has
answer his question?
partially, ma'am. So there is one more question, one more person is asking, is it possible to reconstruct past level of CCD, carbon compensation depth, for any particular age from exposed sedimentary rocks?
Mm-hmm.
So this is in tune with that calcite aragonetic dissolution.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
for this, you will have to do some multidisciplinary studies, and that is, you will have to process these samples and see if there are any forums or whether you have radiolaria, and of course, associated with the deep sea traces or what are called as graphoglyptids. These well directed and well meandering traces, these traces can definitely help you. But of course, it has to be integrated with the availability of at least the microbody fossils.
Okay.
And I'm sorry if I'm okay. Can you mute yourself so that okay? Just one question. What students need to understand is there is a zone of bioturbation, and CCD is almost 5,000 meters depth, which is much deeper. So if there is biozonation or bioturbation to a depth up till CCD, then yes, because the different ichnofossils can surely help us in understanding variation in sea level.
Right,
But
right.
understanding if it can help us in fluctuation of the CCD depends upon the availability of bioturbation till CCD. If it
Yeah.
is available, then yes, maybe it can be used.
Yes, because modern studies have shown, especially those who are doing deep sea drilling and ocean studies, that at depths of around 4,000 on from the box cores or whatever the cores that they have retrieved, they have noticed plenty of bioturbation, and wherein you are not getting body fossils, that they have gone beyond the CCT. So this data is available. Only thing it now remains to be integrated and looked as a wholesome picture, which has not been done so far. Well, that in fact is a very wonderful topic for someone to take up.
Yes.
Shweta, next question.
There is one more question. Does the density of bivalve fossils at a locality indicate conditions of scarcity of space for accommodation? I don't know what the person wants to ask. I believe if you have many of them, does it show that there is a scarcity of space, or if they are
No,
not there?
yeah, what I didn't get is, are they bivalve body fossils or bivalve trace fossils?
Even I am a bit confused with this question. So if you have plenty of them,
If there are
obviously.
plenty of trace fossils, it tells you of the density and not necessarily scarcity.
I request the person, whoever has asked this question, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. I think is this John D'Souza? John, are you here?
Yes, ma'am. The question was regarding the body fossils.
John, can you ask again? Can you ask the same question again in detail?
Okay,
It
he is asking,
was in.
if you have more body fossils, does that indicate scarcity of space?
No, not necessarily.
With relation
to
body fossils, ma'am.
not necessarily, because see, body fossils, unless they are in situ, like you do get in situ beds of body fossils, not that you don't, but at times even there could be winnowed ones. And scarcity of space, if there is scarcity of space, then that community is going to die because of competition. It is finally
Okay, ma'am. Thank
competition
you.
not just for space, it's also competition for food.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, there is one more question. This is regarding ichnofishes. Okay.
Okay.
So the person is asking if you are there any ichnofishes which are known, but you don't know the species which have created them. So this is highly impossible. You first know what the organism is, like what the behavior is. So we name behavior, right? We don't name the organism. So you already know what is the behavior which you are observing, and then you name the ichnofishes after that behavior, right? Am I right, ma'am? So you really
Yeah.
can't have any ichnofishes without identifying that ichnogenus or ichnospecies.
No. Yeah, what we see, these ichnofishes, that they have got certain names like the Scolothos ichnofiches, the Cruziana, the Nerites, and the Zoophicus. Well, these are the typical genera, ichnogenera, or that were found initially, and that's why they were named after them. But now we understand the setting that has led to these species, the species, and then the associated ichnofauna that can occur in a given setting. So in case I have a, what do you say, a horizon that is full of chondritis and some thalassinoides, but I do not have the typical zoophicus, yet I can identify that particular species as the Zoophicus ichnofacies, because it is telling me something about the setup. It is the behavior that defines these species, ichnofacies.
Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
What people need to understand is that the ichnofacies are behavior dependent, and behavior is dependent on environment. If the environment is not correct, if there is no water, you cannot have traces which occur in soupy substrate. So people need to understand that behavior is dependent on environment, and that is why ichnofacies are useful.
May I ask, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Actually, I need to understand that what about the mixed bioturbation? Because see, ichnospecies are very good indicators of the sea level changes, as you said,
Right.
or
Right.
they are the good indicators of the different depths.
Right.
But if there is a transgression and regression is continuously going on with a very shorter period of time, you may get different species at the same place.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
in that way, in that case, how we have to express in terms of the regression transgression as well as the, because you will get
Right.
the different
Right.
behavior
See.
for a short period. So how to explain this mixed
Right.
layer?
Yeah. Right. So here we have what are called as mixed ichnofacies, as you rightly said. And another factor that plays an important, comes into play here is the tiring of the trace fossils. Which occurred, who came first and who came later is important. Just yesterday, I read a very wonderful paper by Tony Martin and others, and this has to do with the what is called as the Taylor trackway bed. And this Taylor trackway bed is full of dinosaur footprints. And all these years, it was identified as continental fishes and only dinosaurs, because in that glamour of the dinosaur footprints, the poor invertebrate footprint, the invertebrate traces were totally neglected. And over the past 6 years, this group has been working, and what they found was there were two episodes of submergence and emergence. And how do you know that? You have one layer of the footprints, and then that is immediately overlain by a thin layer which hosts Diplocratarium, Rhizocorallium, and Arenicolatus.
Okay.
And they go down to the level of the footprints. So you had a continental facies, flooding took place. Of course, this continental facies was close to the coastline, obviously.
Yeah. Yes.
But there was a flooding, and then these marine traces came into, the marginal marine traces came into existence. And then overlying this, there is another bed of the dinosaur footprints, which literally the dinosaurs trampled upon the Diplocratarium, and you can see them in field. And this is how you use ichnology for the minor oscillations or changes in sea level. And if you just look at them as a set of fossils coming from a bed and you're not able to separate them out, then you need to work more. Does that answer your question, Vansarvadkar? Can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, actually, it needs a lot of work at the same place repeatedly, so that you can pinpoint what are the different changes and what are the different behaviors preserved by the animals. And if you go on collecting the different structures at the same place, and if you compare the similar structures are available in the different section also, then with the help of two different sections and the distance, we may go on concluding that these are the different animals having different behavior due to the different depth of the water. And we can correlate with these in transgression regression phases. Of course, it needs a lot of work and it needs patience also. That you did some of the work in your Kutch area. Based on that, I can talk this line. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, we have two more questions. Clarence is asking, in an extraterrestrial terrain like Mars, we might find identical traces as we do on Earth. Does that necessarily mean that there was a life form on Mars, as there are no previous evidences to back the claim? So this is really interesting. So if we get similar traces on Mars, are we going to say that there was a life on the Mars? So in a nutshell, that is what he is asking. Rajni, did Kantimati ma'am went out by any chance?
I think so, because suddenly her screen sharing stopped.
Yeah, I think she is not there.
Yeah, I also think this. Maybe she lost connection or electricity or something like that. Okay. I think let's wait for a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, if there is, if any of the youngsters have anything to say, you could unmute yourself and talk to us till she comes online. I think she might have lost connection.
She has gone to Mars to check whether there are burrows or not.
Why not, sir? I think that is the next thing we need to do.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. We are waiting. Okay. I think she got disconnected and she's just saying that she's joining back in 2 minutes. Okay. Any questions?
There is one more in the chat box, Rajni.
Yeah, I also saw one more in which.
And it is related to sequence stratigraphy. Like
Okay.
if
Actually,
someone wants to.
May I answer it?
Yeah, Amrita, I was about to say.
Amrita, yeah, please answer it.
Yeah,
say the
so
question first. Say the question first, and then answer it.
So the question was, if sequence stratigraphy, if we can use, like, if you want to construct the past sea levels for it, for Cretaceous, which group of fauna will be better as a proxy? Foraminifera, ichnofossils, or macrofossils? I mean, I would like to answer it in very short till ma'am comes. For sequence stratigraphy, we usually
Yeah,
don't
she's
prefer
back.
using a. Okay, she's
Yeah,
back.
I'm back.
You
Yes.
can complete, Amrita.
Yes,
You can
Amrita, please complete because you have worked on ichnofossils and Cretaceous and sequence stratigraphy. So I think Amrita would be a nice person to answer this.
Yeah. So for sequence stratigraphy, I don't think we prefer looking at just one proxy. In sequence stratigraphy, it is always better that we use as many proxies as we can. So, and there is no harm in combining all the information that we have to deduce what were the past sea levels. So both foraminifera, ichnofossils, as well as macrofossils, all of them are of help. Uh, in this, of course, there are like for example, macrofossils will give us more information about uh, the ecology or the age. Similarly, for foraminifera also, we have again two types. One will give information about the environment and one will give information about the age. Ichnofossils, because they are in situ, they cannot be transported. They are excellent indicators of the environment that is present. So yes, ichnofossils are very important when we want to understand the past sea level or to do sequence stratigraphy.
Thank you, Amrita, for doing my job.
No problem, ma'am.
Shweta, can you ask the last question which ma'am lost?
Okay, ma'am, there is one question from Clarence Gomes. Okay, he's in TY. He's doing TY geology. Okay, he's
Okay.
asking you, in an extraterrestrial terrain like Mars, we might find identical traces as we do on Earth. Does that necessarily mean that there was a life form on Mars, or there are no previous evidences to back the claim? So,
Uh, well, really, I have still not reached Mars. I've not even reached Moon. I'm trying to understand our own planet Earth. But yes, it's difficult. You people have sent back, not people, our gadgets have sent back pictures of certain structures on the Mars surface. But all that appears to be inorganic, brought about either by movement of ice, as has been claimed, or by wind. And so life on Mars to this level of evolution is difficult at this moment. So let's hope that someone really lands on Mars and we're able to collect trace fossils and work on them.
Related to this, I have a question. My question is that if you see in the Proterozoic or in the Precambrians, when just like this, like we are finding different traces which are similar to what we find on the moon or on Mars, right? So how do we differentiate such traces which are done because of agents of weathering and erosion and differentiate them from ichnofauna?
Okay, so let me just talk in general about we're distinguishing the inorganic features from the organic features. Well, as we all know, all organisms have specified symmetries. And if an organism has to leave behind a trace or emplace a trace, it can only do so if it has a certain body plan. That is one. Secondly, in trace fossils, you rarely have very sharp edges or squares, because animals, there are no animals with a square outline. They're usually rounded. They have either bilateral symmetry or pentamerous symmetry, and the appendages they have. So where animals have well-developed appendages, they leave behind traces of the appendages, which is not going to happen in case of sun cracks or cineresis cracks, or what do you say, lode casts, or ice traveling. These are going to leave behind more geometrical features like
Yeah, I think we lost the connection with her
Yeah,
again.
we lost her again.
May I add, ma'am, in this?
Yes, sir, please.
Uh, because you asked that there is a how you can differentiate between the organic and inorganic. What madam has correctly told that there are some rounded and the blunt structures. However, in inorganic, I will add one point that it will be lengthwise and the quantity wise and the area wise, it will be vastly extended, covered by the different wind or the other erosion or the inorganic stresses. However, in organic stresses, they would be in a particular horizon, in a particular place, or in a particular environment. So they may be restricted in a particular place or a strata. However, if the surface on the surface, if the organic and inorganic both are there, inorganic may be very high, having high or very vast area covered by the inorganic stresses. These could be the difference between, and as well as the size wise, the inorganic traces are having very lengthwise they are very large, and size wise they may be having different size at different places depending on the speed and the erosion conditions. However, if you see the organic one, they are regular. Everywhere it will be regular because behavior is same. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Rajni, you are muted.
Shweta, any more questions? Because I think till ma'am joins, maybe we can take questions which Vanzarwadkar sir or you or Amruta can answer. And after that, we can take on if there are any more. Yeah, I think even Nigam sir is waiting for a long time to say something. So I would request anyone, if they want to speak, unmute yourself, say whatever you have to, and then mute yourself again so that there is no clash of noise.
Can I do?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please. Yes, sir.
See, first thing I wanted to praise Dr. Kantimati in her presence. Unfortunately, she has gone. So she has done a wonderful job today. Very clean, well illustrated with applied aspects a lecture. After a long time, a good lecture I have listened. Particularly in marine environment, the portion on which she would like to work, we ignore that portion. We remove that. Because wherever there is a bioturbation, we see any sign, we remove it from the core. If there is a turbidite, we remove that portion, the core, because we want an undisturbed sequence for reconstructing the past climate. But I have some experience in coring on the beaches or in the low tide environment, or even in the deep sea when we take the core, sometimes we send the camera with it. The moment we remove the core, the sediment from both the sides collapsed and they fill that cavity. How it is very wonderful that these animals, they create the cavity which is not collapsing. What they do a plastering from inside. How this cavity is maintained in a very loose sediment. That's very curiosity I have. If anybody can answer that one. Kantimati, you delivered a very good lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. The cavities are maintained by
I think again connection is
no, I don't know. There's some issue. What's happening? I don't know. I don't know what's happening, but yes, that's why you have this very feature we use for identifying whether we identify the substrate consistency. If the burrows are well formed, then the substrate consistency was stiff, so it could maintain. And where the substrate consistency is loose or soft, then the different animals use different methods. Some secretes slime, and The others make pellets and plaster them to the walls the way our masons do it. And that is how it is maintained. Did I answer you, sir?
Rajni, your mic is not working, it's mute.
सर आपको मैंने अभी अनम्यूट किया, अभी आप बोलिए.
No, I think it's a very good answer. That's what I was wondering, how it is not collapsing. But see, unfortunately, your expertise, no, we remove it from our core. Wherever we see burrows, we don't use it for paleoclimatic reconstruction from the marine sediment, what we are working. But it's a really new branch. I think those who are interested to work on marine cores where the bioturburation is there, they can collaborate with the nanoscientists. I think it will be a wonderful branch to work.
Sure, sure. Yeah. The youngsters can definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, sir.
Sir, there is Sudhir sir who is raising his hand. So, Sudhir sir, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, can I come in now?
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, first of all, say I have great compliments to Kantimati ma'am. Really, you are a storehouse of knowledge on echinofossils, and I feel like say coming to Pune and learn something from you. That's one thing. And then there was a student who was talking about the CCD level. So I have a suggestion to that student that he should look into the physicochemical aspects of the CCD, should try to understand what is CCD. Then many of his queries will be answered. Because the foraminifera calcareous forms, once they die out completely, then there is what remains below that level is the siliceous forms or non-calcareous forms. So that particular level is mentioned as the CCD. And the CCD, if one understands, then of course he will understand what type of trace fossils or body fossils will be involved. So he should read about this. Thank you very much.
That's very necessary.
Thank you.
Rajni, there are two more questions in the chat box.
Please
Okay?
ask them. Please
Okay,
ask them.
Okay, it is what is the person is saying that I am disconnected from geology, paleontology for very long time. But I was wondering what fact could determine the extent and depth of bioturbation within the sediment. So what he is asking, what are the factors which are responsible for determining the depth and extent of the bioturbation?
Well, one thing is different animals live at different depths within the sediment or in the water column. But nonetheless, every animal has its zone. So it's the availability of oxygen, availability of nutrition, that is food, and predation. All this will govern the depth of, and substrate consistency, of course, will govern the depth of bioturbation. Did I answer him?
Yes, ma'am.
Ah.
Okay, Josna ma'am is asking you also question in same tune. She is asking you, normally trace fossils indicate how much depth in a set of water column.
How much depth in?
Josna Rai ma'am is asking this question. How much depth do indicate how much depth in sediment or water column?
Okay, I mean, these are not perfect bathymetric indicators, but yes, we do have certain demarcations because with depth, there are other parameters that change, and accordingly, the organisms present there and their behavior to adjust to that environment is going to change, and that is how these become depth indicators. And yes, there are below the within the sediment column there have been bioturbation even over a meter.
Okay. What what ma'am was probably saying is, and what I know from being with her is, the depth, you even have bioturbation till on the slope, even on the abyssal depths. Okay, you do have bioturbation, but the depth could vary depending upon the substrate consistency, oxygen, availability of food. Organisms can bury till as deep as 1 meter according to the previous literature. This is what ma'am said, if I'm right.
Yeah, right. That's what I said.
Okay, one last question I would like to take. It is in chat box. It just pop up, you know. Does bioturbation zone means the presence of oil and petroleum?
Not
This
always.
is a normal misconception.
Yeah, not always.
Bioturbation means more porosity, more permeability, and that
More porosity, permeability.
causes more oxidation of your hydrocarbons or loss of hydrocarbons. And that's why it's important that where is the burial? If it is within a reservoir and after the rock has formed, after the petroleum, so it depends. There's so many things.
Yeah. Dr. Rajini. Hello.
Please, sir. Hussain sir, please go on.
Yeah. So, Dr. Kantimati madam, it's a nice talk. You have expertise on that, ichnofossils. And I just would like to know from you, can you just throw some light on thalassonoid burrows, on their paleoecology and things? Thalassonoid burrows.
Yeah, thalassonoid burrows are created by different types of crustaceans, and they occur at different depths, and it is their morphology that is going to throw light on what depth they are occurring, because thalassonoid occurs in the Cruziana ichnofacies as well as in the Zoophicus ichnofacies. And obviously, the animals adapted to these two conditions are going to be different. And the purpose for which the thalassonoid burrow is created is going to be different. And hence, the morphology needs to be studied in depth. And then you can correlate it.
Fine, thank you.
Just a minute. Hello.
Yes, MP Singh sir, आप कुछ कह रहे हैं?
Yes. हाँ. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
No. I'm not asking any question. I just want to appreciate the very nice lecture given by Madam Kulkarni, and especially when she compares the neo genus with the paleo. It was very nice and very clear, I think. And this shows that it has generated so much curiosity among the students, number of questions that has been asked. So this shows I'm very happy. Yesterday we remarked that the participants should be more. So today it has proved. So thank you very much, madam, for a very nice lecture. Thank you.
If there are any questions before we go for the final, the formal closing of today's session, if anyone wants to say something, I request them to unmute themselves and talk to ma'am. I think Kantimati ma'am herself wants to say something.
Okay, before her, ma'am, can I?
Yes. Go ahead.
There is one more last, I would say, Facebook पे आया है, Facebook पे है ये. Okay, can we use ichnofossils as GSSP? Can we use ichnofossils as?
It has been used in Canada, Newfoundland, for Precambrian-Cambrian boundary.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah, I did mention this in the beginning of my lecture.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
May I add something? May I add something?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I did talk to you about the history of global ichnology. Well, I would like to mention here that study on trace fossils in India began only in the 1970s. And that was when Professor Cheplonkar started this, recognized it as an independent discipline. And it initially started off with, of course, your base is taxonomy. So it started as collecting as many trace fossils as possible, identifying them and all that. And of course, we have now moved ahead and we have quite a few people, not many, but yes, there are people who are working on trace fossils from different regions. And I'm happy to be associated with the school that was initiated by Professor Chiplonkar. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, may I
sir.
add?
Yes, yes, sir.
Ma'am, Dr. Nigam sir was talking about how the tunnels were, how the burrows were sustained in the strata while they were preparing. So I want to just add, already madam has given the answer, but while drilling the burrows or tunnels by the organisms, they secrete the mucus. And because of that, the pellets or the balls, they can be sustained because it contains mucus. And their behavior, what madam has told, the plastering, they just
Sir, we lost you. Vanzarvaikar, sir, we lost you. Okay. Vanzarvaikar, sir. Okay. I think we have lost him. So with this, I think, can we call it a day? And if there is no other, if no one else wants to say something, can I request Abhilash to give the vote of thanks? Abhilash, are you there? Our research scholar, Mr. Abhilash Sen. Before that, I just want to tell everyone that we have already sent emails to our, we have received almost 15 abstracts for 1 minute. I'm going to mute everyone. Yes, we have received almost 15 abstracts for students, and it is very, very nice. It's a good feeling because I have received abstracts right from Nagaland, Assam, Jammu Kashmir, from Kerala, and I think there's also a 13-year-old girl who's supposed to be the youngest fossil collector of the country. So we've also got submissions from people who are doing PhDs in anthropology. So I think even the students' presentations are going to be very, very interesting. And because we haven't received a lot of abstracts, I think we'll be accepting all the abstracts that we have received till now. And so on 17th, we'll be giving an opportunity to students to present their fossil stories in about 5 minutes each. So it won't take a lot of your time. And I request all of you to be there even then on 17th, which is a Saturday. With this, I request Abhilash to kindly deliver the vote of thanks for today.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abhilash Sen. I'm a research scholar at Savitribai Phule Pune University, and it gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Paleontological Society of India, Pune Mumbai Students Chapter. The vote of thanks today is specific for today and is covered, and the vote of thanks covering the week-long schedule will be delivered by Dr. Rajni Panchang at the end of the event on Saturday. First and foremost, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude towards Dr. Kantimati Kulkarni, who right from day one kept in mind the objective of the session and took extra care to deliver her talk with the desired impact. Ma'am, first of all, the videos in the beginning of your lecture was so nice, and like it gave us a brilliant idea about how exactly the fossils are being made in real time, and also the principles of ichnology that you shared and like explained in detail, along with the field photographs having so varied lithology, like not only soft sediments but hard sediments, and how the behavioral patterns of these animals can be identified through the study of these tracks and traces were so interesting. And also like how we draw parallels from nature in creating the structures and engineering structures and everything that we do, like how we draw parallels from nature is also very interesting one. Further, I would like to thank the Paleontological Society of India and its office bearers for supporting us unconditionally, and their wholehearted presence during these talks is proof that their efforts and encouragement to our efforts. As I also would like to briefly mention the support of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Nitin Karmalkar, and also the head of the Department of Environmental Science, SPPU, Professor Suresh Gosavi, and our staff for their full support and logistics. I cannot thank you enough. And also I would like to thank the students, office bearers and student members of PSI Pune Mumbai Students Chapter, heads of staff of St. James College Mumbai, Ferguson College, KTHM College Nashik, and every institute participating in. I once again thank you one and all and look forward to your continued participation and hope to see you all tomorrow for Dr. Rajiv Nigam's lecture at 11:30 sharp tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, 11:30 sharp, Dr. Rajiv Nigam's lecture. And I think we probably missed Abhilash's talk when he said that the support of each person from every corner of the country, we thank him for his participation, for making this platform possible. So thanks to one and all, and see you tomorrow morning at 11:30.